Hello! Today I'd like to talk to you about blocking your brioche knits. I know that this can be a controversial subject, and some people say that you should never block brioche because you lose the squish factor, and I don't believe that, and I block every brioche project that I knit, and I still have lovely, squishy, thick, fun fabric. So I'm going to talk to you about what I do and what the techniques are to help make sure that you get the results that you want when you block your brioche knits. So today I am going to be reblocking my braided bread sweater. I always block when I first finish a project, and you generally want to wash your knits at least once a season. This sweater had gotten a lot of wear and is a little bit stretched out and could go for a reblock. It also got a little bit of burger juice on it last weekend, so it's time for it to get its bath. So first thing I'm going to do is soak it, and I'll show you how I do that. All right, so the first thing you need to do is fill a basin with room temperature water, not hot, not cold, and your wool wash of choice. So I used Eucalyptus, but you can use Soak or any of a number of many other brands. The other thing to consider is that with brioche, you are often using two highly contrasting colors, which means that your darker color can bleed into the bath and stain your lighter color, and that can be really stressful when you've spent a lot of time working on a beautiful project and you take it out of the bath to find that the colors are not what you had planned for them to be. So there are a few tricks to help avoid this. First thing that I like are color catchers, which are a product from Shout. And these look like dryer sheets, and you can put one or two in the basin with your knits, and it will help absorb the free dye out of the water and keep it from binding back to your other color of yarn. You can also put a bit of white vinegar in the bath, and that will help set the color. The biggest thing for me is the amount of time that your knit sits in the bath of water. If I am concerned about the colors bleeding, I will set a timer, and I will not let my yarn sit in the water for more than 15 minutes, because the longer it sits in there, the more chance there is for the dye to transfer from one yarn to the other. So for my sweater, I am very familiar with this yarn, and I know that it's not going to bleed. So I am not concerned about it. So I've not added any color catchers or any vinegar to the bath. It's just water and wool wash. And now all I need to do is take my sweater and add it to the basin and push it in to get it under the water and encourage it to start absorbing that water, because non-superwash wool, if you don't push it under the surface, will float and will take a long time to absorb all the water. So I have set it in there, and we'll come back in about 15 minutes and take it out and move on to the next step. All right, so it's been about 15 minutes, and it's time for me to take my sweater out of the water. Now I want to be very careful about how I do this, and I want to reach into the water and support my sweater from underneath. I don't ever want to pick it up and let it hang from one point and let the weight of it hang on the whole piece, because this can cause it to stretch out dramatically and can really distort your fabric. So I'm going to reach in to the bottom of the bucket and pick up my sweater from underneath, and any bits that I don't get, I'm going to reach down and grab. Now I'm going to squeeze out the excess water, and I'm going to do this gently without wringing. once I've squeezed out a good amount of water, I'm going to take my sweater and put it in a towel and use the towel to take it to where I'm going to block it. So the next step is to get some more of the water out of my sweater. So I'm going to lay this towel out flat. And then lay my sweater out flat on top of it. And this doesn't need to be perfect, but I want it to be in a pretty good approximation of the final shape that it's going to be draped in, because it will start holding its shape from this point. So I don't want any big creases or anything that I'm not ultimately going to keep. And then we're just going to roll it up in the towel. And now I walk on the towel for a few minutes to squeeze as much water out of the sweater as possible. After a minute, I like to rotate the whole thing 90 degrees and step on it the other way so that I'm getting as much water out of all the different parts as I can.
Once you take your piece out of the towel, you may find that it is still quite wet, especially if it's a big piece and it was hard to squeeze a lot of water out of it as you were taking it out of the blocking bath. So I will take my sweater and then wrap it in a new dry towel and repeat the process to try and get as much water out and start with as dry a piece as possible so that it doesn't take too long for my final air dry process to occur.
Now, if I were just blocking a swatch or a cowl, at this point I would gently pat my piece flat and I would consider that to be finished. And I would just let it dry. If I were making a large shawl where I wanted to open up the motif that I had created and pin it out, I can stretch it and pin it. But one of the things that allows your brioche to stay squishy and thick and luscious is not stretching and pinning it. So understanding that that is not an essential part of blocking will help you get the results you want when you're blocking your brioche knitting. Now, I know my sweater got a little bit stretched out as I've been wearing it over the last few months. And I also, so I'm going to measure it, and I also recommend measuring and pinning to your measurements when you're blocking for the first time as well. So I can see my piece has grown a little bit, and actually I'm going to pin it to the original intended size. So you can see, especially across the shoulders, my sweater got a little stretched out as I've been wearing it. And by simply pinning it back to the original measurements while it's wet, and then giving it a good firm padding, I'm able to encourage the yarn to have its stitch memory and bounce back kick in. And you can see it started pretty rippled and crunched up as I pinned it to this dimension, and now it's laying pretty darn flat. So I was able to encourage it to shrink back up. So you can, a lot of people don't know that when you're blocking a fabric, you can stretch it, but you can also shrink it. So that's a good thing to be aware of. If your fabric does stretch, you can pin it back to the original dimensions and get it back to the measurements you wanted. I'm not as worried about my sleeves, although I will just double check. Yeah, those are looking pretty good. So I'm just going to get those to lay pretty flat. It's hard to do at the armpits. You might have a little bit of bulk there. But just lay it out flat. And to me, that looks pretty good. So I am going to leave this and let it dry here. And when I come back, I will have a sweater that has gone back to much closer to its original shaping and will be nice and clean and ready to be put into storage until next winter. So I hope that gave you some helpful tips and tricks for blocking your brioche knitting. It's always a good idea to block your knitting after you finish your project. And again, anytime it gets dirty, it's gotten a little out of shape, or at the end of the season when it's time to pack it up and put it into storage for the summer before you're going to be wearing it again next winter. I hope this has been helpful, and this makes it a bit easier for you to understand that you can block your brioche. You just need to keep a few tips and tricks in mind so that you end up with the results that you're looking for. Thank you for watching.